Welcome back to the Lions Den Academy, everyone. I'm so excited to be continuing our journey through chapter 2 of Matthew here. Once again, in the description box below, there is downloadable free lecture notes if you want to kind of follow along to help keep engaged with this. Hopefully by the time we're done with all this, you guys just have a huge stack full of awesome reference material to help you out in your studies. With that being said, let's dive right in. So let's kick off the rest of chapter 2 here with verses 13 through 15, which basically talks about Joseph, Mary, Jesus finding refuge in Egypt. So now when they had departed, and by they they're referring to the wise men, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, "Arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him." When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, "Out of Egypt I called my son." All right, so the command to arise and flee to Egypt, this was an urgent command, and it came, like I said, right as soon as the wise men left. And it probably wouldn't have sounded very strange to Joseph that they should find refuge in Egypt, not only because Egypt was outside of King Herod's jurisdiction, but it was also a place that around 1 million Jewish people live, so they would kind of be amongst friends there. And then where it is saying Herod will seek the young child to destroy him, this is exactly what we were expecting, right? We were talking about Herod's interest to worship Jesus that he was asking for. And it really doesn't speak for that well of humanity when God added humanity to his deity, and in the most least threatening form possible, an infant baby, the almost immediate reaction of one section of humanity is to instantly try to murder him, right? So when he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night. So here again we see Joseph's instant obedience to God's commands there. My man Joseph, he doesn't hesitate one bit. He instantly packs up and heads out of town. Now, we aren't told exactly what part of Egypt that they go to or how long they stayed. In fact, some people think it was a matter of months, some think it was a matter of years, but since the Bible doesn't specifically tell us, we can really only speculate on that. And then when it's talking about the prophet saying, "Out of Egypt I called my son," so through this process, of being chased down and driven into Egypt for, some set amount of time that we don't really know, another prophecy is actually fulfilled in that when we're talking about the Messiah. The prophecy that they're talking about is from Hosea, and that can be found in Hosea 11:1, which states that when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. And Matthew makes it clear here that even as Israel as a nation came out of Egypt, so would the Son of God. So now we get into a pretty dark part of this book that we can kind of summarize as the massacre of the innocents. And that's verses 16 through 18. And that says, "Then Herod, when he saw that he was tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old and under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then he fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more." Now, this event is absolutely tragic, and even one of these children killed was one too many. And I'm not trying to downplay this in any way at all, but just so you don't think that there's thousands upon thousands of kids that were being murdered here, just keep in mind that Bethlehem was not a huge city, and we're talking about just that sort of age range. really, honestly, probably best guess is maybe around a dozen, kids at most, right? Which of course is still absolutely tragic. Like I said, one is definitely way too many, but um, and so here, especially in his last years, like I mentioned, Herod was definitely super cruel and suspicious. When he knew that his death was approaching, he actually had many of the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem arrested on false charges and ordered that they should be killed when he ends up dying, because he was determined that no one's going to mourn his own death, but he wanted to get tears to be shed some way. Now, when we're talking about a voice heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning, that prophecy that he mentioned, this is a quotation from Jeremiah 31:15. Originally, this was referring to the mourning of Israel's mothers during the conquest and captivity of the nation. So here, Rachel is a representation of Bethlehem's mothers. The prophecy was actually fulfilled twice. Once when Judah was placed into captivity and the tribes of Benjamin and Judah were killed and captured. And the second time is with a mass murder here that Herod carries out. So now as we move on to the next verses, which is verses 19 to 21, here we learn about their return back to Israel. And I quote, "But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, 'Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead.' And he rose and took the child and his mother, and he went into the land of Israel." So here, Joseph is once again being spoken to from God in a dream. And again, Joseph instantly obeys God's commands. Now, as I mentioned in the last video with the wise men, we see that even as an infant, Jesus still gets mentioned first over and over again before any of the parents. And just once again, that is definitely against custom. And it just shows that, Jesus already has more importance, more significance, and isn't just an infant, but he's already a king and being treated as such. All right, so now we get to the last two verses of this chapter, but there's also the most to unpack within these. So that being said, let's jump right in. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. So now Joseph was completely justified here in being afraid of Archelaus. To put it lightly, all of Herod's bad traits, Archelaus got those and then some, but none of the few good traits that Herod had himself. He was actually such an incompetent and violent ruler that the Jews of Judea actually ended up pleading to the Roman authorities to basically get him off the throne there, and they finally replaced him with a Roman appointed governor in 6 AD. So now, being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside to the region of Galilee. So again here, Joseph is receiving guidance from God. And again, he instantly moves and acts. Now, Joseph most likely was intending on going to Jerusalem because he thought, that is the religious hub there. That's the place to raise the Messiah. But he actually ended up, because of this, going to the populous region of Galilee, which had a much more significant population of Gentiles, which is a non-Jew population than Judea or Jerusalem, which is kind of significant in itself, right? Because Jesus didn't come to just save the Jewish people, he came to save all of us, right? The Gentiles alike. And then he came and he dwelt in a city called Nazareth. So it's kind of interesting too that Joseph came back to Nazareth. This was the hometown of Mary and likely Joseph as well. And this is kind of for two reasons. One, right? Nazareth itself was kind of an unremarkable town. Didn't have any walls. It was completely unprotected. And if it had any sort of reputation at all, it was a bad one. So much so, in fact, that actually when Philip had met Jesus in John here, and then he goes and tries to convince Nathanael, saying, "Hey, come, the Messiah's here. I want you to meet him." he tells him, that he's from Nazareth, and Nathanael goes, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And then the second reason too is that Nazareth was where, like I said, it's the hometown of Mary, so everyone there knew the strange circumstances around Jesus's birth, and they're going back there, and like I said, that's probably a town of maybe 150 people, so there's going to be some gossip raising a son from those strange circumstances. So now this last part here, where Matthew's telling us, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. Now, this one is actually kind of interesting here because of all Matthew's references to the Old Testament and the prophets, all those, we can, specifically find passages in the Old Testament referring to this. But there is no place in the Old Testament that says he shall be called a Nazarene specifically. However, there's 4 likely reasons for this, and I kind of want you to be equipped with this because this is actually one thing that some people will say contradicts the Bible. But if you have all this ammunition here, you can come right back at that and kind of silence that. So the first one, Matthew says prophets, not prophet. So if you compare that phrase here with any of the other ones, he says spoken by the prophets, not prophet. So the other times, when Matthew is referring to a prophecy, he specifically, singles out a single one. But here he's likely quoting oral prophecies that never made it down to paper, but were shared verbally and universally understood by people at that time of the Jewish faith. The second one is the translation. There's multiple different Hebrew words that could be associated with the Greek word Nazareos or Nazarene that are defining of Jesus. So we have Nazir, which is a consecrated or holy one. We have Nazar, that is to consecrate or to separate oneself. We have Nasser, which is to keep watch, protect, and or preserve. And then we have Nesser, which is root or branch, and some have taken that to be alluding to Isaiah 11:1, that says, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots." And then thirdly, he says called, right? Not shall be. So to start, let's look at that exact wording. So Matthew says he would be called a Nazarene. In Scripture, be called often meant the same as shall be. So in Genesis, when God created Eve and said that she would be called woman, right? He obviously didn't mean that her name was woman. Her name was Eve, of course, right? However, by nature, she was a woman. And even earlier in Matthew here, as we were talking about the birth of Jesus, he quotes Isaiah saying that they shall call him Emmanuel. Now, Emmanuel wasn't his actual name, right? Jesus was his name. But, while he was Jesus, he was definitely by nature God with us, which is what Emmanuel means. And then, fourthly, we just have Jesus' similarities to Nazarenes. So as I mentioned before, Nazareth didn't have the best of reputation. In fact, it was looked down upon and despised by most, along with its residents. And if this is what Matthew was referring to, the prophecies Matthew had in mind could include, the 2 passages concerning the Messiah that follows, which is Psalms 22, 6 through 7. It says, "But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads." Or it could be Isaiah 53:3, which says, "He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem." If these passages are what Matthew had in mind, then the meaning of "he shall be called a Nazarene" was more like saying he shall be despised and mocked by his own people, which he definitely was. and indeed, Jesus here would become known as Jesus of Nazareth. His followers were called Nazarenes. In fact, Jesus even calls himself Jesus of Nazareth in Acts 22:8 when he reveals himself to Paul on the road to Damascus. And this was after his resurrection. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up chapter 2 of Matthew. Now, when we pick up on chapter 3 in the next video, you'll see that we'll be doing a bit of a time jump here and jumping into the start of Jesus' ministry, John the Baptist, and all that. The only gospel that will actually give us a brief glimpse between Jesus' birth and ministry will be Luke, and we'll just get one little short story with that. But during this time period, Jesus was simply growing up and being faithful over a few, right? Being faithful over little. Because as we'll come to see, if you can't be faithful over little, you can't be faithful over much. So it's safe to kind of assume here, and once again, it's not in the Bible, so I can't say anything 100% hardcore accuracy here, but it's safe to assume that during this time he would fulfill the responsibilities expected of a firstborn son. And at some point during this time, he would also end up taking over the role of man of the house when Joseph ends up passing away. So during this time, he was likely working on his trade, supporting his family, and proving himself utterly faithful to 1,000 different small things before he formally entered his appointed ministry. So I can't wait to pick up the rest of the story here on chapter 3. Got lots of cool stuff coming. So see you next time, and you have a blessed day.